Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another episode of PEM Rules, the Pediatric Emergency Medicine podcast. I have a very interesting episode today. Today, we're not really going to talk about medicine, but rather we're going to hear a very inspiring story by a very special, hardworking physician that I think we can all learn from. That physician is Ellen Fitzpatrick, a colleague of mine who works as a hospitalist in Las Vegas where I work, but also as a PEM physician. Yes, she does both. So welcome, Ellen, to PEM Rules. Thank you very, very much for your time. I know you and I have been in touch for a very long time trying to do that. You're a busy hospitalist. I'm a busy PEM doctor, so I appreciate the time you found to do this. Let me just introduce you briefly to the PEM Rules listeners, and you're going to correct me at any point if I misspoke. Ellen, you are originally from Omaha, Nebraska. That's where you grew up. You went to medical school at Creighton University School of Medicine in Nebraska, graduating in 1999. Prior to that, you actually went to law school, finishing in 1992. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So you are a doctor and a lawyer.
Correct.
And then you finished your pediatric residency. Where was that?
That was in Dallas, Texas at UT Southwestern.
Okay. And currently, Ellen works as one of our pediatric hospitalists here in Las Vegas. And the reason I know her well is because, in addition to her work as a hospitalist, she also helps cover the ER. So, in our ER, at any given time, there's a PEM fellowship trained individual, in addition to a Gen Peds individual. And Ellen often serves as that extra pediatrician in the ER. So, we work together in the pediatric ER, and I've admitted many patients over the year and a half that I've been to Vegas to her service. So, Ellen, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great, Yaron. Thank you for inviting me to do this.
Oh, thank you for coming on the show. I'm very excited that the PEM Rules listeners are going to hear your story. First question I have for you, Ellen, before we get into the story, is a question I ask all my guests on PEM Rules, and I'm very curious to hear your answer because, again, you're a hospitalist and a PEM provider. The question for you is, what is your definition of a good PEM provider? One who does what?
To be effective and compassionate provider in the pediatric emergency department, I think first of all, you have to have a love for kids. And, most of us are pediatric trained, even prior to the PEMs going on to their fellowship. So I think it starts with that foundation. And in your pediatrics training, and just by nature of you wanting to do that, I think most of us are pretty compassionate people and good listeners. I think the most valuable skill you have in that short amount of time in the emergency department is really listening to the concerns that the parents are bringing up.
Very good. I couldn't agree more. It's actually one of my rules, and one of the things I tell the residents: to be a good PEM provider, you got to get a good story. So I guess that goes along with being a good listener. I often find that the physical exam only goes so far. Really getting a good HPI is the key. Easier said than done sometimes in a very busy shift, but I agree with you. Thank you very much for that. And Ellen, let me continue by kind of introducing the story of how I met you, and then I'm just going to let you speak because I'm very interested that our PEM Rules listeners will hear your story. So shortly after arriving to Vegas, I come in the morning for my morning shifts, and I meet Ellen for the first time. And Ellen is my colleague for the day. I'm the PEM provider. She's the Gen Peds provider, which is really the same thing. And I noticed that Ellen was using crutches. And about a year and a half before that, I had an unfortunate minor accident, and I sustained the smallest, tiniest foot fracture, also known as a pseudojones, which is really not a big deal. And I found life on crutches to be very difficult. Getting into the car, getting out of the car, just things that are super simple and I took for granted were very challenging, let alone working as a PEM provider in an ER where you're on your feet all day. So I admit, stupidly, assumed that Ellen also had a foot fracture of some sorts. And I asked her, "Oh, Ellen, you must have broken your foot. That's why you have crutches." And I couldn't have been more wrong. I felt kind of silly, but Ellen didn't think much of it. And she told me her story, which really, really inspired me. And I wanted the PEM Rules listeners to hear that story as well. Ellen, the stage is yours. I guess it's really your life story. Tell us your life story.
Sure. Well, first of all, I never mind commentary or people asking. I hear a lot of times. I do walk with crutches. I would consider myself like a partial paraplegic, and um, that is a result of I was diagnosed and lived through having a neuroblastoma when I was approximately 3 months old, and the malignancy was near T11, T12 in the sympathetic chain. It was a dumbbell sized tumor kind of wrapped there. And my grandmother actually found it, and she thought I was the third kid for my parents. We were on the East Coast at the time, and my grandmother had stated, I think her legs seem stiff. And my mother was like, "Oh, Mom, you're always looking for something." But then she said, "Well, what about this?" and felt this mass. So I was fortunate that we were on the East Coast and they took me to Boston Children's, and I had the tumor biopsied and removed. It was found to have these small, blue round cells consistent with a neuroblastoma. And I had radiation therapy as well as chemo at that time. So that, all of those things at such a young age left me with the weakness that I have. So I've had, I got through the cancer part of it and have never had a recurrence or anything like that. I've been very fortunate that way. I've just had a lot of kind of orthopedic and mobility issues stemming from that. And I had, pretty bad scoliosis and kyphosis from the tumor and the radiation and everything. So I've had two spinal fusions as well. I used to wear a back brace, and I wear short leg braces too to help with my weakness. But I think I've had maybe in total, maybe 25 surgeries in my life. Nothing recently, thank goodness. But spending my life kind of in and out of children's hospitals and as a patient kind of inspired me to want to go into medicine, and especially pediatrics. I always knew I wanted to be a pediatrician when I went to medical school. Yeah.
So again, now that it's clear for everybody, but I just want to make it clear for everybody even more. Law school, medical school, residency, and being a PEM provider and a hospitalist, all on crutches like that.
Correct.
Yeah. And again, the reason that story really shocked and inspired me is I was on crutches for maybe 3 months and life was really difficult. Again, I was a PEM provider. I had to work. I took a few days off, but I had to go back to work. And again, just simple things. Luckily, it was my left foot, so I can continue to drive, but life was that much more challenging with, again, just a very small temporary injury, which is why your story inspired me. And I remember, Ellen, when we spoke, you said something about your parents and how you think their approach to your injury or to your weakness made a difference for you. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I always say your lottery in life are your parents, right? If you have good parents that are encouraging and supportive, because everybody runs into struggles in life, mine are just more obvious than others, right? Nobody gets out of this life without struggling in some perspective. And I'm fortunate that I had great parents that, I'm the third of seven kids. And they they took care of me. They got me to all my appointments. They did amazing job making sure I had the best care, but they also didn't treat me like a China doll. Like I had chores, I had things to do, like maybe I wasn't carrying heavy things or running to do something for my mother, but I was folding towels, I was loading the dishwasher, I was, everybody had their job to do. And my mother and father, they believed in me and they said, this is not going to stop you. You can do whatever you want to in life, and I really credit that sense of empowerment they gave me because, I see in my own practice a lot of kids who are really kind of, with chronic conditions and they're so babied that, the parents do, overdo it sometimes. And you can just see the kid just trying to bust out and be like, no, I can do this. I can do this for myself. So I was fortunate that I had these parents that were like, if you want to be president of the United States, you can be president of the United States. If you want to be a doctor, you can be a doctor. Like, so that, I always had that. Like, that gave me so much confidence. And I used to, it was funny. I used to say to my mom, Mama, why do they stare at me? Why do they stare at me? Because I had braces and crutches and everything. And without thinking a second, she would just say, it's because you're so beautiful. And so, like, the perfect thing to say. So I'm like, oh, I'm so beautiful. I grew up with a lot of self confidence from my parents. So I think that really had a lot to do with my success and my perseverance. So I'm very fortunate for that. I know not everybody has that. So
Absolutely. No, I
yeah.
couldn't agree more. That's, even more inspiring for the listeners, those of us who are parents. Believe in your kids, encourage your kids, and tell them how good they are and how you believe in them. I guess that's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And without like, overdoing it. Like if I didn't do things right, I was punished and I was told when I could do things better. And, much was given to me, but a lot was expected too. I was expected to get good grades and, I didn't get to go, to the movies if I didn't, or, things like that. So like I had boundaries, but I had support, just kind of that perfect balance.
All right. And it's probably not a simple balance, especially in such a large family, I imagine.
Right. Probably not easy for my parents, but I think my sisters, I think we all were accountable to each other too and kind of raised each other. So, and that fostered competition. And if I saw my sisters doing something, well, for sure, I wanted to do it too. So that was a good thing as well.
Very good. Yeah, competition is mostly good. I agree with you. That's a good point. And again, Ellen, really, truly, truly amazing story. For all of us, myself included, that kind of feel sorry for ourselves when we have to get out of bed with a cold and go to work. I think it's good to hear some people have significant other limitations. They go to work, they go to med school, they go to law school, apparently, they finish residency. So I think we should all be inspired by that story. Thank you very, very much, Ellen, for sharing that with us. And I can't help asking you at least one more question, and it has to do with the fact that, and I don't meet people like you very often who work as PEM providers in the busy pediatric ER, but also serve as hospitalist. I find those two jobs to be very, very different. As a Peds provider, I often think myself as a non-diagnostician. My job is to provide acute care for the patient, whatever they need, maybe fluids, maybe CPR, maybe just Motrin, and then kind of decide on the appropriate disposition. Is this child safe to go home, or is this potentially something bad that I need to work up and rule out? Again, I don't think myself as a diagnostician. You, as a hospitalist, you're in the business of pinpointing the problem. And I'm curious to hear from you. How do you balance those two, what I think quite different roles? Pediatric emergency medicine provider and a hospitalist?
That's a great question. And people ask me, all the time, which role I like better, which I prefer. And I really enjoy both. I think I wish everybody could do both because I think, sometimes the angst we feel with one another is because we don't understand what position we're in. So, as a PEM or as a pediatric provider in the emergency department, the exciting part of it is you get kind of first crack, right, at the kid coming in. So you get to start the investigation, start the ball rolling, and you may not come to the diagnosis right away, but you can make that decision whether they're stable to go home, whether they need escalated care like in the ICU, or they're fine for management on the floor if they need to be admitted. And then once you're on the floor, it's very easy to sometimes pick apart what the ER does, as I'm sure the ER can do that to the hospitalist as well. But when you start out there, you realize the constraints you're in and in the emergency department in terms of, you're not really sure what's going to happen when this child goes home. And sometimes there are things other than, just the clinical condition that's going on. There may be social aspects to lead you to make sure that this is a safe disposition for the child. It seems like we have a lot of those types of issues in Las Vegas with our patient population. We just need to make sure they're safe. But once they get to the floor, then I get the time to really dig into the case, take a longer history, serial exams. You can follow up with labs. You can repeat studies if you need to, and speak with consultants. So you've got the luxury of time when they're on the floor, and you can finally get to hopefully the answer. So that's very satisfying. But I think people who enjoy the emergency department are a little bit of they like the adrenaline of the sick kid coming in and the stabilization factor. And that's, I do enjoy that. And I like to see, when they first come in. And then if I've been on for a couple of days, it's nice then if I go to the floor, I'm like, oh, I saw that kid in the ER. Now this is what he looks like. So
Very interesting.
both parts are enjoyable.
Yeah. And I agree. I often tell the residents probably the single most important tool in evaluating children is time. And unfortunately, in the ER, we don't always have that. Hence, where you guys come in, and I gotta say, sometimes I am a little jealous. You have the privilege of time and seeing what this kid looks the next day and the next day. Very gratifying. I can totally see that. Ellen,
Yes.
I couldn't thank you enough for coming on the show again. Really, really amazing story. I think it's truly inspiring. What you went through, what you said about your parents, and that's exactly why I wanted to have you on the show. I have a little tradition in PEM rules on the podcast, and I think I'm going to break it today. So usually the guest gets to choose the outro I play. I know I do all the music on the podcast. Today, I'm actually going to choose for you, if that's okay.
Sure.
So one of my favorite bands, you probably heard of them, are the Foo Fighters, and they have a song called My Hero. And I think that's
Oh,
a very, very appropriate song. Maybe you can dedicate it to the parents. I'm dedicating it to you. It's a great song. It's a great band. So how about My Hero for the outro?
sounds perfect. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you again so much for coming on the show. Really, really great story.
Thank you, Jan.
And that is it for today, guys. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you got inspired by the story. I hope you all learned from it. I certainly have. Thanks again for listening to PEM Rules. Please continue to check out the website, submit any feedback, any ideas you have for the podcast, or if you want to come on the show and discuss a clinical case you have, or anything pediatric emergency medicine related, just let me know. This is My Hero by the Foo Fighters, dedicated to Ellen, her parents, and all those hardworking people out there.